Okay, continuing on with our outlines of the books of the Bible, we come to the second book, Exodus. In chapter 1, the Bible talks about how Israel multiplies in Egypt. There's a huge population explosion of the Israelite people. And chapter 2 talks about the birth of Moses. After the people started multiplying, the Pharaoh perceived them as a threat, and he had thrown them into slavery. And so the birth of Moses is shown us in chapter 2. And what happened is that Moses had killed one of the Egyptian slave masters after he grew up, obviously. And he took off and went to a place called Midian. And God appears to him in a burning bush there. He tells him to go back, that he's going to use Moses and his brother Aaron to lead the people out of slavery. And Moses also ends up getting married. He meets a man named Jethro and marries one of his daughters. In chapter 4, we read about how God has given Moses powers after he returns to Egypt. And he tells them, of course, Moses tells Pharaoh to let his people go. And this makes Pharaoh mad, and Pharaoh increases the slave labor of the Israelites to make things even rougher for them. But God promises action in chapter 6, and in chapter 7, God shows them just what this action is. Chapter 8, in chapter 7, it starts the plagues that God brings on Egypt. The waters turn to blood. Chapter 8 tells us about the frogs that invaded the land and the plague of insects. Chapter 9, we see that where God has caused the Egyptian cattle to die, and the plague of boils, the plague of hail. Chapter 10 covers the plague of locusts and the darkness over the land. And chapter 11 is about the last plague, how all the firstborn of Egypt are going to die. And this brings to chapter 12, the Passover lamb. And they had to put blood on the post so the angel of death wouldn't kill all the firstborn of Israel. And we see here that also in chapter 12, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is instituted there. And then we see the Exodus of Israel. At 13, we see the consecration of the firstborn. And after Pharaoh had let the people go, after all the plagues and stuff, Pharaoh changes his mind, and he sends his army after them. We see this in chapter 14. Also in chapter 14 is where God divides the Red Sea. The Israelite people cross over in safety, but when Pharaoh's army tries to follow them in their chariots, the Red Sea closes again and they all drown. Chapter 15 is the Song of Moses and Israel. And in chapter 16, now the people are out in the desert. They're on their way back to the Promised Land. And they start complaining about food, and God sends them manna from heaven. If you look in the book of Psalms, you'll see that manna is actually the food of angels. In chapter 17, they're complaining again about water this time, and so God does a miracle and provides water from a rock. Excuse me. In chapter 18, Jethro sees his father Jethro, and Jethro gives him some good advice. Jethro tells him to stop trying to govern all of the Hebrew people by himself, to institute a sort of government, which Moses does. And in chapter 19, we see Moses on Mount Sinai. And this, of course, is where God gives us the Ten Commandments through Moses. And in 21, we see the ordinances for the people. It talks about things like personal injury cases, property rights, things like that. In chapter 23, it talks about the sundry lands, the Sabbath and the land, Then we come to the conquest of the land, and the people decided they sent some spies in, like 12 spies, and they came back and they said, most of them said, no, 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 we can't do this. There's too many people. They're big. They're huge. We're never going to be able to take them. Joshua and Caleb, of course, say, yeah, we can. But the people listened to the 10 instead of Joshua and Caleb, and they, of course, have to travel through the land for 40 years. But then the people affirmed their covenant with God. And chapter 25 talks about the offerings for the sanctuary. This is where we're talking about where the tabernacle, the tent, which is a forerunner to the temple in Israel. This is a portable temple, the tabernacle. And it talks about the offerings for the sanctuary, and this is where we find out about the Ark of the Covenant and the table of showbread, the golden lampstand. 26 lets us know about the curtains of linen, the boards and the sockets, and things like this. 27 is the bronze altar and the court of the tabernacle. 28 tells us a little bit more about the garments of the priests. Chapter 29 is about the consecration of the priests and the sacrifices that they were supposed to make and things. It talks about the food of the priests. And chapter 30 tells us about the altar of incense. Then 31 talks about the skilled craftsmen who made all this stuff. When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, we find earlier that people got tired of waiting for him, and they decided to make a golden calf and to worship the golden calf, which is a big no-no. They got themselves in all kinds of trouble. And 32 tells us about the golden calf, and Moses talks to God and tries to get him out of trouble. And then it also talks about Moses' anger, and after they get all that trouble resolved, in chapter 33, that journey is resolved. The 2 tablets are replaced because Moses got mad and broke the tablets that the 10 commandments were written on. And so God replaces the 2 tablets of the 10 commandments, and the covenant is renewed in chapter 34. Chapter 34, the Sabbath is emphasized, the day of rest. In chapter 36, the tabernacle, start talking about the tabernacle a little more, and the construction proceeds. And 37, the construction keeps going. And in chapter 38, the tabernacle is completed. 39 talks a little bit even more about the priestly garments. And in chapter 40, the tabernacle is erected. And of course, this is where the glory of God, the Shekinah glory, meets with people. And we see this at the end of chapter 40, which brings us to the end of the Exodus. And we see that next book will be Leviticus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. And Leviticus is about the Levitical priesthood and the laws that God gave them. We'll see more about that next time.